So last week I was not here. I had someone filling in. And 2 weeks before that, we had our gathering, so I wasn't here to have our usual Sunday school class. 3 weeks ago, we were studying the topic of anti-Semitism and Christianity. And this week, I decided I'm going to put that study on pause. We'll come back to it, but in light of some national events that are, or I should say an event that's coming up here in a few weeks, I decided to interrupt this regularly scheduled program to give you a special study. So this actually was motivated by an email that I received from the WCF, the Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation. Who's on the mailing list for the WCF? We got 1, 2, 3. Okay. They had a roundtable discussion among 5 20-year-old, 30-year-old brethren, brothers and sisters, and I spent the time watching the video. It's about a 20-minute long video. I believe when I was talking to Jacob Larson, who participated in the event, he said it was like 3 hours. I could be wrong. I might have misunderstood him. But anyway, it's a 20-minute video. I'm not going to play the whole 20-minute video, but the video is what motivated this special study here, and it's probably going to take more than 1 week. If it takes 2 weeks, that's fine. So what I really kind of would like to do is extend the roundtable discussion that they had to a roundtable discussion here amongst us. So to get back, I think I mentioned this was on the topic of voting, and again, because of the November 5th elections that are coming up, I thought this might be a timely study. We'll get back to the anti-Semitism study once this one's over. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the email for those who did not receive the email. The email was titled, "A Political Year of Decision, New Faith Roundtable Video." And this email has a link to the WCF website. For those who raised their hands, I think there were 3, how many have actually watched this video? Actually, we have more, okay. So some have watched it who didn't get the email. I'm going to just play the first 7 minutes. I will say what's unusual about this particular roundtable, it's not the first time WCF has hosted a roundtable discussion, but in the past, they've had an elder brother, someone in his 50s, 60s, who was facilitating this discussion. When I talked to Jacob, he said that was planned, but the elder brother fell sick at the last minute. So what you'll see is just 5 young people kind of hashing out or discussing this topic amongst themselves. So let's go ahead and jump into the video and hit play. And we go with audio.
My stance is that voting is an important function that goes on in the world, but that God rules in the kingdoms of men, and that if I were to vote, even if it was for the most Christian-like candidate possible, that if it does not mesh with God's ultimate plan, it will be for naught, and that I would rather let Him make those decisions and leave that ultimately up to His hands.
I thought about this a lot sort of the whole time I was growing up. And then about 10 years ago, I kind of came to the conclusion that one of the ways that we can help people who are less fortunate than us and positively affect people in our communities was by voting. As I look through the Bible, I can see the importance that God places on helping those around us. Throughout the entire Old Testament, the way the prophets talk to the nation of Israel, the law, and today, and in our communities, one of the ways we can do that is by voting.
I genuinely don't know how to feel about this topic. I was raised in the church with the position that we are strangers in this world, we are witnesses for Christ, we are his ambassadors, and as such, it would be inappropriate for us to participate in this world's political system. But as I've grown up, I've come to see more and more that I think we also have an obligation to the people around us outside of our church, that it's our duty to love them and support them, and that some of the ways that we can do that are through voting.
I'm a physician, and I am training to be a general surgeon. And the way that I see issues related to policy and healthcare show up is when you're seeing people, teenagers that are victims of gun violence, and you're wondering, is there more that you can do in the community, figuring out what factors are involved in this person ending up here. And a lot of that is policy, and one of the surefire ways to change policy is to vote.
What I end up doing when I look through scriptures, I try to find something I can apply to my life. So Abraham is the man who is called out of the land of Ur of the Chaldeans to make a trek that would have been going to a place where he would have had no clue. And he gets to the land of Canaan, and he is told that his family will eventually receive it, but it's not going to be for another couple generations. Abraham ultimately was trusting on God to bring about that promise, that he didn't try to take the matters into his own hand. And I look at myself and I see that as a opportunity to let God rule and wait on his timing.
I agree with that. It's central to taking myself out of the equation and getting out of my own way, is that the hope is that when I do that, by falling back on God and his promises, is that when I take myself out of the equation, I as myself become less visible and God becomes more visible. And his love becomes more visible through me rather than just me.
When I think about community and what that means to me as a physician, there really isn't an option to not be involved in it. So I don't want to remove myself from it. And that's not something that I feel is what God would want for me to do with the talents that he has given me. You pray that the small amount of interaction that you have with your patients and your coworkers is one that uplifts God and then glorifies God. Where else can I try and enact change?
I really like that, because the question of what more can I do, how can I impact with the time I have? Abstaining from voting is a decision that brings out potentially more to talk about than voting would, because it is a different choice. Where are you? Who do you support? Being able to say none of the above, well, why not? Well, that gives you a chance to be able to have one of those deeper conversations in that particular case.
Have you had a conversation like that?
Not lately, because haven't been able to vote for that long. If I were able to.
I'm totally with you all on the idea that, yes, we need to love our neighbors. We need to be active. We need to help. But I feel like relying on the government and actually not doing it personally ourselves, and it puts it away from us. And we're like, all right, I wrote my check for the day and I can send it off, and I didn't actually have to put in the sweat equity of showing love and care.
It sounds to me that both groups are kind of arguing the same point here, that either not voting or voting is your form of witness. By not voting, you are witnessing that you belong to the kingdom of Christ. By voting, you are witnessing that Christ compels you to love your neighbor, and this is how you do it. You're both trying to accomplish the same thing, just in different ways.
I started working as a midwife about 5 years ago. I have found in my whole career in healthcare, you can very directly see how the policies that are enacted by the government affect people in poverty, can truly impact their lives, like up to life and death. And I find that it's not something that I can take lightly, and it's something I experience every day.
So in that case, I'm kind of curious, are you more selective in terms of like, for these particular issues I will vote, but for these I won't necessarily vote because I don't see the personal impact of these as directly? Like, you're very close to healthcare issues.
So I don't really separate the issues as much because I usually look into all of the information that I can on this person and their policies and the things that they want to change before I make a decision.
So when you are vetting your candidates that you would be potentially voting for, and then let's say they get in office, they end up doing both good things that you support and then bad things that you would not have supported, how do you weigh that in your own head?
No, it's all an exercise in trying to do the best you can. I think, like you're trying, sort of with any decision you make, we're trying to make the best decisions that we can with the information that we have at the time. And I think God would agree with.
Okay, so those were the first 7 minutes of this video. I played just enough so you can kind of get a feel for each of where the 5 individuals were coming from, and you can kind of get a feel for their ultimate position. Now, if you go to the website, WCF website, right above this video, there's a large, I guess you want to call it a button, it might be a banner. It's essentially a disclaimer, and I've highlighted it up there and pointed it out. If you tap on that, you'll get this explanation here. WCF presents this roundtable discussion on voting and political involvement by a group of young believers as a means of encouraging understanding of disparate points of view on the subject, with the discussion based on Scripture. Open discussion is crucial in today's complex cultural climate. Many leave our community of faith because they feel unheard and misunderstood. We can't let that continue. If we embrace open conversations and discussions, members of our community are far more likely to stay and remain rooted in our common faith. These roundtables show that we do value their voice and that we want them to know we hear them and value them. Each individual must make their own decision on political participation. Our hope is that this video will help to stimulate deeper thought on scriptural teaching on the subject and so guide faith-based discipleship. And the disclaimer, that's basically what you see there, but there's more below the screen snapshot. The disclaimer goes on, however, to remind us of the historic position that Christadelphians have taken with respect to politics and voting, how it has been historically our practice to abstain from politics, and that includes voting. The disclaimer also mentions how voting, or the abstention of voting, how that affects those who have been faced to serve in the military during draft or during times of war when conscription or the military draft is put into place. And I think it's a good thing that the disclaimer was added in light of how the majority of young people in this video were tending to distance themselves from the traditional Christadelphian position. That was the one thing that stood out. If it didn't stand out in the first 7 minutes, it definitely stood out by the time you got to the end of the video. Although I will give, unfortunately Jacob's not here, Jacob Larson, who, I don't know, he kind of seemed like he was temporarily the facilitator. He was doing his best to steer the discussion, or at least remind the participants of our historic position. That comes through a lot more if you continue watching the remainder of the 20 minutes. And I encourage you to watch it to see, where are young people, where their heads are, and what they're thinking. So in keeping with the spirit of open discussion as presented in the video, I wanted to discuss this topic in more detail. And I thought we'd start by analyzing some of the comments made by I'll call them dissenters in the video, which unfortunately turned out to be the majority, and specifically, it turned out to be the 3 sisters amongst the 5. So what I'm going to do is, let's just look at the first sister's position, and I'm just going to play that back, and then we're going to discuss the point that she makes.
I thought about this a lot sort of the whole time I was growing up. And then about 10 years ago, I kind of came to the conclusion that one of the ways that we can help people who are less fortunate than us and positively affect people in our communities was by voting. As I look through the Bible, I can see the importance that God places on helping those around us. Throughout the entire Old Testament, the way the prophets talk to the nation of Israel, the law, and today, and in our communities, one of the ways we can do that is by voting.
I genuinely don't know how to feel about this topic. I was raised in the church with the position that we are strangers in this world, we are witnesses for Christ, we are his ambassadors, and as such, it would be inappropriate for us to participate in this world's political system. But as I've grown up, I've come to see more and more that I think we also have an obligation to the people around us outside of our church, that it's our duty to love them and support them, and that some of the ways that we can do that are through voting.
I thought about this a
I
lot
would
sort of
bring
the whole
up
time
the
I was
first
growing
sister.
up. And then about
Actually,
10 years ago, I kind of came to the conclusion.
I said I was just going to present the first sister. Actually, I put two of them together because essentially the second sister echoed the position of the first sister, so I wanted to bring both of those to our memory. So the position presented here by the two sisters is one of the ways that we can help people who are less fortunate than us and positively affect people in our communities is by voting. And as I said, the second sister pretty much echoed this same sentiment, stating, I think we also have an obligation to the people around us outside of our church. That is our duty to love them and support them, and that some of the ways that we can do that are through voting. All right, so those are the two positions of those two sisters. And then the argument that the first sister gave was this: I can see the importance that God places on helping those around us throughout the entire Old Testament. The way the prophets talk to the nation of Israel, the law, referring to the Moses, the first 5 books, or the Torah, and today in our communities, one of the ways we can do that is by voting. So I want to discuss this particular point of view and this argument. So one of the ways that we can help people who are less fortunate than us and positively affect the people in our communities is by voting. Is this a true statement? I need someone who's going to be running the mic. Be a volunteer. You can go first, Rob. Just, I'll have to limit your time. Okay, so is this a true statement? And if it is true, is there something that's being overlooked with this particular argument with respect to as followers of Jesus? And I know there are many arguments against voting, but I don't want to hear them here now. What I want to do is focus solely on this response for the time being. So look at the argument, position, and if you want to give your position or your opinion on this, raise your hand and speak clearly so we can all hear. So we're just talking about this particular argument, that we should vote because one of the ways that we can help people who are less fortunate than us and positively affect people in our communities is by voting. Let's see, Walter, he's got his hand up. So again, is this a true statement? And then 2, what is wrong, if anything, with this position?
First of all, it's unfair to limit us to this because there's a lot that needs to be talked about here. This statement is just total false logic with a definitely lack of understanding of what God expects us to do in this world here. He expects us to be witnesses. And by not voting is a very important aspect of witnessing. He says, I'm not part of this world and the things of this kingdom. I'm part of the kingdom that God is going to establish. So I listened to those talks and everything they said, and there was very false logic there. In fact, it was very poor logic that they were using. So what I'm saying to you is, yeah, this is totally wrong, and they don't understand the perspective of what the scriptures is trying to teach them. They're setting themselves up for a world of hurt, because this is one of the basic foundations of how we avoid being constricted and put in the affairs of men and go out and kill people.
Okay, so one point you point out is the false logic behind here. And I guess the logic would be, it's not the only, voting is not the only way we can help people less fortunate than us and positively affect people in our community. The question is that even an effective voting? Is that even an effective means? Rob?
Without using the term, give me a break, I'll say, so if you're knighting yourself as this servant of mankind because of the way you vote, how does that set up people who don't agree with your political viewpoints? So if you say, I'm serving the poor because I'm voting for this candidate, and you find out that someone else is voting another way, so I'm just taking it down the road. So how could you vote for this? You don't care about the poor because you're not voting for this candidate, right? So do we need that sort of tribalism and dichotomy in our own ranks?
So I guess the assumption in the position here presented by the two sisters is that only one of the two would have the proper way of helping the poor. So what I'm hearing from you is that it's possible you could have two candidates or three that all have suggestions on how to help the poor. And if we all are free to vote, then we end up, potentially creating this, called tribalism, but this conflict or difference of opinion as to which of the three is the best. That's not necessarily evil to have three different opinions as far as how to solve a problem. But I think Walters gets more onto it starts to affect other things such as our witness toward Christ. And I guess we can go into that a little bit later, but I just was trying to focus on this argument. So I've gotten two negatives so far. Jason?
Allow me to play the devil's advocate for a second.
Excuse me?
Allow me to play the devil's advocate
You want to
for a
play the
second.
devil's advocate? Okay.
Yep. One of the ways we can help people who are less fortunate is by voting for certain policies that, if enacted, would help them. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what is the greatest help that we're looking to do, right? So we think maybe they need monetary help, maybe they need some sort of social assistance, things like that. Oftentimes, though, let me quote Ronald Reagan, the words most feared by people are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, right? Yeah. So sure, yes, help is great. Where does our real help come from, right? So I think people lose track of that. But because they have lost track of where real help comes from, then they think that help comes from me. My God is my strength. My God is my shield. He is these things. But if I think I want to become those things, then I think that I'm going to insert myself into those pieces that would affect an outcome that I want.
My answer is no.
No to what?
That this is not how we help. I guess, Walter, did you say no? How did you phrase it? I don't think this is an accurate for our community position. A false statement. I guess in her eyes, it is a true statement. I can't take that from her.
Well, technically, would it be true that one way, I'm not saying the only way, but is it true that one way that we can help people less fortunate than us is by voting? Is that potentially true?
No.
It's never true that there could be never any good, like Social Security or Medicaid.
Let's look at. Let me take the other position.
Again, I guess I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah, and I'm going to do that. Who are we trying to help, or who are we hurting? By taking this position, we are hurting those that, for instance, Jacob, if he chose to be a conscientious objector, this video would be used against him in his position as a member of this community for taking that position.
Right.
So that Charles Munns and all of those who took time out of their life to, and this is not to knock those who serve in the military, but for us that take a position of being a conscientious objector, you know, a lot of our brethren, you know, served alternate service that I feel was more in keeping with our position as servants of Christ and separate ourselves from this world. Many of our brethren, unfortunately, in past times were actually harshly treated and affected in ways that I won't discuss here.
So can I stop you? So one thing, you're kind of doing what I was planning we would talk about later. What I wanted to do is just focus on this one particular argument. What's the problem with this argument? Yes, generally, this is against traditional historic Christadelphian practice. And there are many arguments. You're presenting it, Walter's presenting it. What I'm looking at is just individually this particular argument. What's the flaw, if any, in this argument? Okay, you had great thoughts, okay? But you're getting a little ahead of where I want to go. And I just want to focus on this particular argument.
Well, what comes to my mind is two things I'll say. What is a scriptural example? And it's Christ told the story of the Good Samaritan. It's the people that we meet every day in our lives. We're never told to help people on a national basis because we can't. Our vote doesn't really have anything to do with, I don't know how to say it. The example in the scripture is to help our neighbor, those who we come in contact with. It has nothing to do with what the government can do or anything like that. It's because we can't help people on a national level, but we can help people every day in our lives, regardless of what the laws are.
Right. I don't deny that. That's
Okay.
That's spot on. I get that. But the question is it a false statement that that voting never helps those who are unfortunate? That's what the arguments are that these two sisters are presenting, that by voting, good can happen through our vote. That's really what I'm focusing on.
Right.
It's true that all of us can help our neighbor individually. That's without any argument.
I just wanted to, hang on. Just there's one verse that comes to mind. I'm probably going to do again what you're saying you didn't want to hear, but I don't know. I'm still trying to understand how you're going with this. But in 2 Timothy 2:4, it's a verse that's not quoted very much, but I think it's extremely important. It says that no man that warreth entangleth himself in the affairs of this life. And voting will entangle us in all of this political stuff that can come out of it. Entanglement is something we're told to withdraw from of this world. And to me, by voting, we're entangling ourselves.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. We got another, looks like we got a bunch of.
Okay, I mean, I'm looking at this from partially a Christadelphian view, but then also because I'm not a Christadelphian. The statement in itself is true, but it requires context, okay? Walter and everybody else keeps talking about nationally, or heaven forbid, Walter was talking about killing people in war and all that, because I've had to do that, okay? I'm not proud of it or anything else. It was a necessity at the time. What everyone's saying about killing people in war, take a look at Israel's history. Take a look at Jewish history going back to Moses and 40 years. How many wars and battles did they fight? Okay, yes, we can have, voting for you guys is a big deal. Your traditional view is you don't vote, you need to stay out of it. But Roger was talking about entangling yourselves in the politics. Guess what? You're entangling yourselves in the community, period. Politics aside. Okay, there's a lot of things in the voting area I don't particularly like. Okay, I may not espouse all those things. Okay, but the one thing that everyone tends to forget is We don't live in a vacuum. One of the things that God gave everybody is free will. We try to help as many people as possible in our own way. Okay, yes, you cannot affect nationally your one vote. It doesn't work that way. But not everything you vote on is national. There's a lot of voting stuff that goes on that has to do with your own community. Okay, not everybody in your community is Christadelphian. In fact, in the mainstream, you guys are actually fairly small. But your one vote might be the difference between helping people in your own community that really need it. Okay? Do you really need to entangle yourself in all that thing? No. And in some ways, I mean, some of you guys might not like this, but in some ways, I think some of your things are a little hypocritical. You guys are talking about people not espousing the same tenets and everything else. But one of the things that Catherine told me when I first met her and everything, you guys have amended and unamended. That in itself is arguing against each other. You both have the same thing, but you see it differently.
Okay. Well, we're really getting off course here.
I'm just saying, though.
I do appreciate your feedback. I want to point out a couple things. One, the wars in the case of Moses and what we're talking about today are two different things. There's a theocracy that we need. You talk about context. The wars in the Old Testament, you had a theocracy. God was the one that says, go out and kill, go out and so forth. When David went to war, what was the first thing he did? He prayed to God as to whether God approved of that particular battle. That doesn't happen today. So we're talking about apples and oranges. The amended, unamended, it really has nothing to do with the talking about participating in national elections. Yeah, we all have a beef about that. But what I wanted to do, and I guess I got this out of you, this is not a totally false position to take, that it is conceivable that some good could come from voting. So I will give the sisters, half a point or whatever for that being inaccurate. Now, the problem then is there something we're overlooking? And that's what I think a lot of us are trying to bring forward. I want to get there, but it's almost like we're all kind of like pent up. We want to nip this in the bud is kind of like what I feel. So maybe I should move on because we probably covered this one enough. I just wanted to share what the young people are thinking, and one of the reasons they present, a reason they should get involved, because they see that some good can occur. I'm not going to deny some good can occur, but the bigger question is there something or some things they're overlooking in their attempt to do good? Okay, and I think some of us are kind of pushing back that they are overlooking something. Jason, you got a...
Yeah, it just brings one scripture into this and it might be out of context, but Paul says all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial. Right, so, I'm sorry. No, all things are lawful, but not all things are beneficial, is what Paul says. So it may be that it's okay to vote, but is it the greatest benefit to our service to God in order to do that? And I think most of us say no, some of us say yes, and Paul says, you know what, it may be okay for you to do that, but it's not the best thing for you to do.
That's an excellent scripture, because there can be benefits by voting. As we see here, you could have Medicaid benefits extended to help the poor, the infirm. I'm not going to deny that, but is it beneficial as witnesses of Jesus, as strangers and pilgrims? Is it beneficial to do that? What are we forgetting if we do attempt this short-term benefit for the people around us? Are we forgetting a bigger purpose, which is our calling as witnesses for Jesus? That really is going to be the bottom line with this particular argument, I believe. So why don't we move on? Thank you everyone for participating. How much time we got? 2 minutes? Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this then. Where I wanted to go, it's probably going to end up being more in 2 weeks, the rate we're going. What I wanted to do was share their thoughts, because it is concerning to see the younger generation, and the majority of which are moving away from the historic Christadelphian position. What I wanted to do was bring up What was the reason why we, have taken historically the position to abstain from politics? Alexander the Great, there's a story, I don't know if you heard of it, confronted one of his soldiers who was lacking courage and showing cowardice on the field, and he gave him one more chance, and he said, "Soldier, what is your name?" First thing. And he said, "Alexander." Alexander. Alexander the Great said to this other Alexander, "You either change your name or you change your behavior." In this whole argument, there's one thing we need to remember is, where did we originally get our name from? Christadelphian. In this example of Alexander and the soldier's name being the same, Alexander the Great was ashamed that this individual called Alexander was not behaving, up to his standard. In our case, if we're going to identify ourselves as Christadelphians, there's something we cannot forget. Where did that name come from, and why did that name come into being in the first place? And I would ask these individuals who are, the three young ladies here, sisters, do they know the history as to where the name Christadelphian came from? What was the context? And even more specifically, there's actually a document that's on record where we can find for the first time the name Christadelphian. And if you go to that document, you'll find something very, very enlightening, which these three sisters, I doubt, have ever thought about. So that was going to be where I want to take this discussion. I just want to, reassure people that I do not agree with the position of these three sisters, but I thought in the spirit of discussion, and because it seems like our younger generation are thinking differently, that we should have this discussion. I know, I guess I can tell from what we've had experience here in the last 20, 30 minutes, it's a very, I guess we have emotions, and some of us are trying to defend the traditional position. What I want to do is give them a chance to express their point of view and discuss it, okay? I didn't want to get too far ahead, because there are a lot of reasons. I can come up with more than a dozen reasons against this position. But I wanted to say that toward the end. I wanted to at least give them a chance to express their position, and just question, is it logical? Can they be condemned, or are there actually points that are valid from, their argument? That's what I wanted to do, okay? So just to clear the air. Hopefully anyone who knows me where I come down on this particular topic, but I wanted to extend this discussion in the spirit of inquiry and fairness. Any questions, last comments? Yeah, I think Jerry was.
So if we're going to, as our position is not to vote, it's very interesting that generally in meetings, there's voting. Voting goes on in a lot of Christadelphian meetings of who's going to be the speakers, presiders, who's going to do a certain function, how the ecclesia is going to run is taken by a show of hands, which is, and again, we could take that very first comment she put up there and change it instead of country or fellow people, say members. Members vote and say, this is the good of the ecclesia. And you say, well, that's not political, but it is voting. And it's interesting, there's a brother who wrote a book called Ecclesias Are Not Democracies. And if you think about it, in the Old Testament, no one voted Moses in, right? Now, true, the children of Israel wanted a king. God gave them Saul. But in that respect, the issue here is that if you're going to say voting out in the world is bad, then we have to look inward and say, is voting something that should be done in the ecclesias or left to the brethren, okay? And so it's just something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a different topic. I just want to make it very clear what we're talking about is voting in political elections. I'm not talking about voting what we're going to have for lunch, okay? Or voting who's going to be the Sunday school superintendent. Rob, you're doing a great job, by the way. So, there, when I say we're, Christadelphians historically been against voting, that, I mean, clearly I'm talking about political participation in that, that arena. So yes, it should be, it's useful, I guess, to set our terms straight at the very beginning, and thank you, Jerry, for pointing that out. Yeah, the question about the egalitarian structure of the ecclesia, that's another matter, but we'll maybe save for another study.